All right, good morning. I am taping. Welcome to day 54 of the online Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class. Put down a list here. It's kind of a longer email than I normally send. The plan is the first thing we're going to do today is finish up chapters 18 and 19. That is the rest of the Muroc jQuery textbook. I did send you again a URL list that we'll go over in just a moment before we go over the actual chapters themselves. I'm also going to do for you a couple different programs. They're not mine. They're something I found online, but that'll show you the two basic ways that you perform AJAX or asynchronous JavaScript and XML entries. So we'll go over those as well. After we get done with that, I did put in here your final, so to speak, your HTML, CSS, JavaScript final programming assignment, and we'll go over that. All right, finally, after we get done with those two things, I'll go over the second JavaScript Hot 2 test. All right, unfortunately, there still are 2 or 3 people who never turned it in, so those people are going to get a 0. Now, I have been contacted by a few people saying, hey, for this reason, for that reason, I'm way behind on homework and written tests, etc. Can I still turn in stuff even if it was from earlier in the semester? The answer is yes, I will take it. The maximum that you'll get on anything that's fairly old is 50%. All right, but if you're missing 10, and some of you are, so if you are missing, for example, 10 written tests and you make them all up, it's much better to get half credit for them than it is to get no credit. All right, I'll just leave it at that. I'm going to make tomorrow a lab day so you can kind of sit back and look at your final in there and note any questions that you have. So I'm going to make, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take and give you as much lab time to work on this as possible. So this week you will have Tuesday and Friday to work on it. Next week you will have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to work on it. All right. So Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to write a couple complete JavaScript applications. We'll also talk about the requirements for your electronic portfolio, which is due now. It's coming up. It's in about 5 weeks or so. All right, due on 12/20. All right. Now, I always put these little remembrances in here. So your chapters 8 through 9 free code camp homework, and that is to finish up, and that's really 8 through 10, but it's really to finish up the free code camp ES6, 29 lessons, and then send me a thing that you completed it. And if you do that, that's 75 points right there. All right. Your chapters 12 through 19 written tests and that 8 through 10 stuff will all be due next Sunday, the 19th. All right. And again, your JavaScript final will be due the Monday after Thanksgiving. All right, 11/27. Finally, again, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that I am scheduled to be off the week of Thanksgiving. So I will be available, but it'll be limited availability. So if you've got questions during that time, email me. I may not get back to you until that evening, but I will get back to you. All right. So with all that said, let's just get started here. And the first thing I'd like to show you, and it's not new, all right? But if we look at this, this is where we are right now. This is the class you're in. I'm not going to read a bit of it. By now, you have been introduced to HTML, CSS, JavaScript. In addition, we spend some time on jQuery, a JavaScript library, and we spend some time on Bootstrap. Now, for some of you next semester, if this is your first class right now, all right, you will be taking AWD1000, Programming Fundamentals with C#. What I will go over with you on that class, not today, but the last Monday that we meet, which is December 18th, I will give you about a half an hour intro into what that class is about. I will tape it, all right, and put that out there as well, so you'll know. I have not yet finished the syllabus. I'll be the one teaching that class, and I have not yet finished the syllabus for that class. All right. Some of the rest of you, if this is already your second class, you will be taking AWD1111, Database-Driven Web Development 1. All right. And again, I'll have a little bit to say about that class also on that last Monday. All right. And we'll just, I'll leave it at that for right now. Okay. So if I go back in here and I show you, these are the 7 or 8 or 6 or whatever it is URLs that I gave you today. Again, I went through this the other day. This is a very good tutorial if you want to learn what Ajax is. Notice as it says, it's not a programming language. All right. The other thing that's kind of interesting about that is if you look right here, it says Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That is true. That said, I'm not sure of what the exact number is here, so I'm kind of pulling a number out of the air, but I would guess it's pretty much the truth. There's 2 ways that you can do Ajax. One is with XML, one is with JSON, JavaScript object notation. Probably 80 to 90% of all Ajax that's done is done using JSON, not using XML. In fact, many people today will just say that Ajax doesn't stand for anything because they never use XML. And it's not important that you even know what XML is. It really isn't. Now, they give you an example here. I'm not going to go through much of this, but I will go through this one just so you can see it. All right. So if we go take a quick look somewhere in here, I thought they had it where you could run it. There you go. Try it yourself. All right. Now, I'm not going to go through any of the code right now, but I want you to see what's going to happen. When I click this, what's on the page is going to change. Boom. Okay, and you might say, oh, big deal. It is a real big deal. Because what Ajax allows you to do is what's referred to as a partial page rewrite. So in other words, the only part of a web page that has to change, the only part that has to change is the part that is changing. But if you've got, a web page that's only got a paragraph changing in it, all right, then what you are able to do is just change that paragraph. And for lack of better words, leave the rest of it alone. All right, so that's the key takeaway from this. Again, I'm not going to go over this. I don't, it's not my goal to confuse anybody in here. But again, this is a very good tutorial. Now, what they mention in here is Ajax XML HTTP. All right, and that is the second link that I have in here. All right, there's actually 2 basic ways of performing Ajax. All right, again, later on this period, I'm going to write a simple program that's going to show you both ways. It is not my program. I found it online. All right, but one way of doing Ajax, or this partial page refresh, is to use what's called an XML HTTP request object. Now, you don't probably care about the history, but approximately 25 or 30 years ago, there was a guy, not the famous outlaw by this name, but there was a developer named Jesse James who said, hey, Microsoft created this XML HTTP request object that nobody's really using. So he figured out a way to do it and do this partial page refresh. Now, is that the only way that you can do it? No. The other way, I couldn't find a great thing on it, but you're going to see it. All right. So we will go over that a little bit later today. But again, the idea is when you do this is you only change the parts of the web page that literally need to be changed. All right, so that's the key takeaway for that. Now, this is the Ajax page that's in here. Again, another one of the things that I gave you from the URL list, but this is the page from Mozilla Developer Network. It's unbelievably expansive and inclusive. It's got everything you could probably want in it. All right. Now, after we get done with this chapter, we're going to quickly go through chapter 19. And when we do, we'll talk about Node.js. Node.js is one of the 4 things that you are going to learn in the AWD1111 Database-Driven Web Development 1 class. In that class, you learn about a feature that is literally referred to as the MERN. Let me blow that up. It is referred to as the MERN stack. That's what the course is about. All right. And the M stands for MongoDB. You don't have to worry about what it is right now. All right. The E stands for Express. The R stands for what we'll be going over after the Thanksgiving break, which is React. And the N is for Node.js. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. You may or may not remember this, but we actually did talk a little bit about Node.js earlier in the semester when I mentioned to you how you can save things out to GitHub pages. We actually used a little bit of Node. All right, but we'll talk about that as well. Again, the W3 Schools is unbelievably written, well written. All right, you can even see it. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. There's some stuff with databases. We don't use Node typically a lot with MySQL. We use it more with Mongo. But you'll notice you got a lot of stuff in there. So those of you who decide maybe during the break that you want to get a little head start on things, if you're going to be in the AWD 1111 class, that'd be something that you could take a look at. And also here's the Node reference from the Mozilla Developer Network. And finally, this is the Express works with Node. It's kind of a part of Node. All right, but there's the other part that's in there from from the Mozilla Developer Network. All right, so where we are in here is right now I'm going to go over chapter 18, how to work with Ajax. Once I get done with chapter 18, I'm going to write a fairly simple program. All right, and we're going to see 2 different ways that you can actually use this stuff. All right. And one of the ways that you can use it is going to be by using this XML HTTP request object that you'll see in just a bit. And the other one is the other way that I didn't mention before, but it's something referred to as fetch, F-E-T-C-H. All right, we'll talk about both of them. So once we finish this, we're done with this book. All right, so I'm going to jump into chapter 18 right here. And I'm not going to go nuts talking about anything that's in here. All right, because again, it's not my goal in here to confuse the heck out of you. It is my goal in here to introduce you to the concepts that you're going to be learning either, in one of your next classes. All right. So you can see this is, as always, broken up into several sections. All right. Intro to Ajax, how to make a single Ajax request. Then they've got an app in here, an astronomy picture of the day, how to make multiple Ajax requests, another application, more skills working with promises, which we've talked a little about, but we'll talk about more in just a few minutes. And finally, how to make cross-origin requests. So as it says, this chapter shows you how to use Ajax to update a web page without loading a new web page in the browser. All right, so it's known as a partial page refresh. All right. So again, it's not my goal in here to read to you. That's why I mentioned this to you right here. All right. And they give an example of just going out to Google. So if I go out to google.com right there. All right. Whoops. Try it again. So I'm here. And let's say that I want to find out something about Ajax. So I type in an A and there what clicks in. All right. Google suggests, but as soon as I put a J in, it all changes. Another A, boom, it changes again, and an X. And you can see that it's got a bunch of different stuff in here, like Ajax Cleaner, etc. Ajax, a lot of stuff. But if I come in and write, type this in with web, all right, then you'll notice how it changed every time in here. The whole page didn't change, just this part changed. And that is not the greatest example, but that is an example of the use of Ajax. All right. Now, notice what it says here. The way this is typically done is either by using the XML HTTP request or XHR object, or by the use of the fetch API. And this chapter will give you an example of both. I will give you later an example of both. All right. So as they mentioned there, when you work with Ajax, the browser uses JavaScript to send a request, parses the return data, and it modifies the document object model so that the page is updated as quickly as possible with the new data. All right. Now, they do mention in here too, it says on the web server, an application or script that's written in a server-side language returns the data that is requested. We don't care about that. All right. It says oftentimes these are part of an API. We have talked about APIs a little bit before. I have likened an API, which is an application program interface, to a contract. And it's a contract between you and software. The software says, I will provide these features and this functionality to you. And you agree that you are going to use those features and that functionality in the way that it was meant to be used. All right. And that's really what they're talking about in here. All right. So they're going to show you a couple pictures on the next page. This is not that different from stuff we've looked at before. All right. When you look in here, what's new? Well, as opposed to just a simple HTTP request, now it's an Ajax request. All right. And again, don't want to sit and keep rereading and rehashing the same stuff. Just take a look at what's in there. Again, you're going to see an XHR example and a fetch example in just a few minutes. So in here, they talk about XML and they talk about JSON. Let me give you my take on both. I'm not going to read a bit from this. All right. Back probably sometime around 20 years ago, all right, a decision was made. In fact, really about 30 years ago, a decision was made that we shouldn't be using HTML anymore. It had outlived its usefulness. Well, that didn't last, as you know, because you wouldn't be learning it otherwise. All right. But what people suggested was rather than coming up, all right, and keep updating HTML, let's come up with a new language. That new language they came up with was XML, the extensible markup language. The main difference between XML and HTML is HTML, as you know, has got a specific number of attributes that you can use with it. All right, we've looked at most of these in the semester. There's probably 100 or 125 or so. But the idea with XML is you could make up your own tags. All right, and all sorts of versions of XML shot up almost overnight. There was XML that worked with chemistry. There was literally chess XML where you could play chess with it. There was music XML. From what I heard, there were about a couple hundred of these that came up. Now, the problem was it was very hard for a lot of people to immediately think about transitioning over from HTML to XML. So they made a language that was supposed to be a bridge called XHTML, which actually supported both. All right. And when it first came up, XML to me was like, I always give this analogy, and you may or may not be able to identify with it, but I use the mushrooms analogy. Most people that I know either love mushrooms or hate mushrooms. And that's kind of the way it was with XML. It never, in my opinion, never really caught on as much as people thought that it would. That said, it's still used all over the place today, but I don't think it ever became the new it factor that people thought it would be. All right, and that's why around the late 90s or the early 2000s, that's why people said, this isn't really hacking it, and they went back to regular HTML. All right, then they talk a little bit about JSON, JavaScript object notation, and it is the most popular way to work with JSON, right? So with Ajax rather, but the main reason is they talk about it being less verbose, which is true, but virtually all major programming languages have things built into them to work with JSON. And that's what they mentioned in here. All right. So when you look at this, this is the difference between these. This is XML right here. When you look at it, you might say, well, it looks like HTML, but notice the name of the tags: management, management, team member, team member, team member, team member, name, title, bio, etc. So your own tags. All right. JSON works with key value pairs. So the key is name, the value is Agnes. The key is title, the value is vice president of accounting, etc. Again, these are the two most common data formats that are used with Ajax. There are others, but again, it's kind of like saying, okay, for browsers, you've got Google and you've got Bing. And then what's left? Ask Jeeves, and a few like that. Yeah, they're out there, but they're probably less than 5%. Same kind of thing in here. As it says, both XML and JSON are formats that use text to store and transmit data. Most server-side languages today, most use JSON. All right, they mentioned that JSON is less verbose, okay? But again, there's just typically much better support built into most programming languages for JSON as opposed to the support for XML. All right. Again, I didn't want to get into this in this much detail, but let's take a look at the example that they give in here. All right. So this JSON placeholder web service, again, there is all sorts of stuff that is built into the internet where you can go out and you can request things. You might say, well, what are you talking about? Notice up on the top here, it talks about fake data. Let's say that I was writing an application and I wanted it was something, let's say for users, it would give them a custom login or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. I could go out to this JSON placeholder web service and I could get myself 100 bogus users that it made up for me. All right, and you can see these are a bunch of different things that are in here that you can go and request. Here's one where they've requested users, and you'll notice they're saying in there that if we request 10, The ... just means there'll be more stuff in there, that's all. But we can get 10 different users. So as it says, it provides an API that accesses fake data in JSON format. What's nice about that is, again, if you're writing your own system to do something, right, you don't have to worry about putting in the data. You can make a call up to the internet and have the data, basically, for lack of better words, created for you. All right. Okay, so there's two basic ways, as I mentioned. It says first, this chapter is going to show you how to make an XML HTTP request. Then it'll show you how to do it through fetch. Most people will tell you that they use fetch today because it's less code, and to most people, it's a little bit easier to understand. All right, but we'll look at both because both are still in use today. All right, so on the next page, as it says, this will be some of the stuff. So every AJAX request, as mentioned in here, uses an open method and it uses a send method. All right, so the open does just that. You're basically making a request and you're saying, hey, I want to send out an AJAX request. All right, now there's a lot more to it than that, as you can see in here. After you've made the request, and once you basically get permission, for lack of better words, all right, you'll end up sending out your data. And if you look at the middle part of this table here, all right, it shows, the first thing it shows there is response type. Okay, and it says, what type of data are you expecting back? Is it just plain vanilla text? Is it JSON? Is it some kind of a document? Blob actually means something. Blob stands for binary large object. Usually that's associated with an image. All right. Then you've got response. As it says, it's the content that's returned from the user. All right. Then you've got another one in there that says ready state. It's like, what the heck does all this mean? Well, I make a request. Okay. Once I make the request, there's no guarantee that it's going to happen like that. It's supposed to, but it may or may not. So when you look at that ready state, 0 means my request has not yet been sent. 1 means that my request has been opened. 2 means that the associated headers for it have been received. 3 means it's loading, so it's ready to be sent. And 4 means that it has been sent. All right. What will be very important when you end up taking the AWD1111 class is this status thing. All right. You may have seen the two statuses that are mentioned here. You may not have. But if you attempt to send something and it works, you're going to get back a status code that will be somewhere in the 200 range. Usually just a 200, could be a 201, a 202, etc., depending on what you're sending. But 200 means success. All right. 400 means failure, and failure on your part. So you tried doing something, you requested a file and you gave it a wrong path, or you spelled the file name wrong, or something like that. All right. There's also, that's not shown on here, but you can get back what's called a 500 status code. That means it's not your fault. The fault is on the end where you sent the request. So for instance, if I went out to Rankin and I made a request right now for something, but the Rankin website was down, all right, or maybe part of it wasn't working, I might get a 500 back, telling me it's not my fault, just try again later type of thing. All right, when you go from one state to the other, as it says there, you get an on ready state change. All right, and when there's an error, you get an on error. So this is the kind of thing that it looks like. I don't expect it to make a lot of sense to you. All right, just to show you quickly though, all right, This is going to be our XML HTTP request. Typically, it's named XHR, XML response object. All right. You're saying that basically you're working with JSON. Here you're saying, okay, when you do your ready state change, okay, if the ready state is 4 and up here it had said 4 means that you're done, all right, and the status code is 200, meaning it was successful, give me the response. All right. Here, what they're saying is if there is any kind of error, log it. So just show it on the console if there's an error. And what are we doing here? We are attempting to go out to this site that has JSON fake data, and we're attempting to have some of that sent to us. And that's what's actually displayed here, because that's what's happening. All right. Now, that was one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to use what's called a fetch. Now, we're going to look at the example on the next page in just a second. To some people, when you see this fetch, oh, that's a lot easier. And other people have told me that's a lot harder. All right. Because again, typically you don't find two people that are going to agree, especially in the IT field, that, yeah, this is the best way to do it. It's just not going to usually happen. All right. Okay. What this works with are what are called promises. All right. Now, what's a promise? Well, let's forget about computers for a second. Let's say that you're a brand new student at Rankin Technical College. All right. So you come into Rankin and you sign up for classes. All right. And they say, okay, it's going to be this amount of money. And you say, okay, and you give them, let's say, a MasterCard. All right. And they try to bring everything through, but they get something back that there's not a problem, but it'll take a while until this comes back. But what you've done, all right, is you've signed up for classes. All right. So what's happened then is Rankin is now making a promise to you. But if you have not yet received the message back that you've been accepted into Rankin, that promise is pending. All right. When, let's say that they needed your high school transcripts or something, when they get that information, then the promise is fulfilled. All right. From what I've heard from other people, Rankin used to accept checks, that people could write a check for their tuition, but a lot of those checks bounced, meaning, as it says here, there was an error condition. So the promise was rejected. So the promise is a request you make. And when you make it before it's been serviced, it's pending. If you make a request and it's fulfilled, all right, that the promise was fulfilled. If you make a request and it's rejected, it didn't work. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. And they do give a couple more terms. They say a promise that is no longer pending is considered settled. And it doesn't matter if it worked or it didn't work, but it's not pending anymore. All right. Since it's not pending anymore, again, the way that that's referred to is, okay, it's been settled. All right. Second, a promise can be resolved without being fulfilled. All right. It says, for example, if a promise returns another promise, the original promise is resolved, even though the request has not yet. Oh, what the heck does that mean? That means that if, kind of look at it this way. All right. Let's say that I ask one of my kids, I say, hey, would you do me a favor, please, and get me a soda? And they're like, okay. But then I've got 3 daughters, and one of my daughters walks up to another daughter and says, hey, you owe me something. Go get dad a soda. So that second person gets dad a soda. Well, it's been resolved from the first person, because the output from one thing has become the input to another thing. So they show an example here. All right, and they talk about it, but you'll notice it's less code than we saw before. So this says, do this. If that works, then do this. If that works, then do this. But if you have a problem either in the fetch or in one of the thens, do a catch. It's very similar to like a try catch that we did look at a little bit in an earlier class. And when you look up here, I'm not going to read these to you because I just went over them. Again, some people say that this is much easier to work with than using that XML HTTP request object. Some people say it's not, but as it says, for new development, it's considered better to use fetch. All right, so the next thing they have in here, we're not going to even go through this other than to mention it, is this example is got an astronomy picture of the day thing. And if you go out to this site and you put in a date, they'll give you a picture that corresponds to this date. All right. Now, is that big a thing? No. But the idea is what you're doing is you're getting data from an API or an application program interface. All right. So they show you the HTML for it and the CSS. I think the example I give you is going to be better. All right, we'll see. Let's just, out of curiosity, let's see if I put this in. All right, it says API key missing. All right, so it doesn't even, looks like it doesn't even work right now. I don't know what I'd need for that. Don't want to find out. All right, because again, it's not my goal in here, not my goal to waste your time. All right. So then they show you the JavaScript. And you'll notice there's a bit of it in here. All right. With the example that I give you in a few minutes, there's not much. I think in both cases, there's going to be somewhere around 20 lines, whether I do an XML HTTP request or I do a fetch. Now, again, you might say, okay, fine. Why are we even doing this? Because you're going to see an example of a fetch API when we go in and look at a little bit of the React stuff that we'll be covering after the break. All right. And you will be using that quite a bit, doing things like fetches. Those of you who are taking the AWD1111 class next semester, or those of you who take it the following semester. All right. So you will have to work with it, for lack of better words. All right. Now, it says making a single request allows you to add all sorts of neat stuff, but what if you need to do a lot of stuff? All right. And it's interesting. It says the problem that you can run into when you do an XML HTTP request is you can find yourself in literally what's called callback hell. All right. And the funny thing, not haha, but funny thing about this is if I go in and type in callbackhell.com, there's actually a website that explains exactly what's happening in here. All right. And it's kind of like you got an if and an if and an if and an if, etc. But it explains it. It's one page. This is the whole website in here, not a short site. But if you want to see more about what callback hell is, just go out to callbackhell.com. All right. And what they mention again in here is, again, if you use the XML HTTP request, it says you need to nest requests. I make a request inside of another request, inside of another request, inside of another request, etc. Like I said, it's kind of like having an if within an if, within an if, within an if. And it can really slow things down, and that's what callback hell is all about. So they give you an example of this in here. So notice they're using an on-ready state change. So if we look in here, this on-ready state change is inside of this on-ready state change, which is inside of this on-ready state change. And they all have if statements associated with them. So as the author mentions here, if you need to use data from an asynchronous call to make another asynchronous call for related data, and you're using this XML HTTP request object, you can put one thing inside of another, which can slow processing down and give you what's called callback hell. All right. Well, how do you get around that? And again, all I'm trying to do here is mention some words so that when you get into the AWD1111 class, you'll have heard them. All right. And those two words that are used in here, the way that you get around this is you use the words async and await or await. All right. And basically what it does is it says, hey, don't do this until this has worked. All right. It kind of, for lack of better words, slows the process down a little bit and makes sure that everything is working the way that it's supposed to work. All right. I'm not going to go through callback functions because it's just too confusing. All right. And believe it or not, I'm just about done with this. There is another application in here. This is a photo viewer application. All right. Have a look at that if you so are so inclined. But more skills. Yeah, this is the kind of thing you'll learn in a later class. How to create and use your own promises. All right. Some of the things that are built into promises. What async and await are all about, how they're used, why they're used. All right. How they fix callback hell. All right. There's a for await of, there's another kind of for loop. All right. But I think what I'm going to do, okay, let's finish this up because we're just about finished. All right. Says so far, all of the examples in this chapter work because they make requests to an API that allows cross-origin requests. For security reasons, many APIs do not allow cross-origin requests. Fine. What the heck is a cross-origin request? Basically, it's when you're at a website. If a website has to call something from another website to do its job, that's a cross-origin request. Some websites don't allow that to happen. If you're on a website, they're not going to allow you basically to do something that'll require you going into another website. Some allow it, some don't. All right. And you'll hear this term CORS, C-O-R-S, as it says, can be used to check whether JavaScript is allowed to do this or is not allowed to do this. All right. So that wasn't meant to confuse you. All right. But this is what we're going to go through and take a look at right now. All right. I'll go till right around 9 o'clock and then we'll take a break. All right. But if I go out to here, I think this is the right one. If I go out to numbersapi.com, this is an API. You can see it's called Numbers API. All right. And if I go out here to numbersapi.com and I'm going to put in the number 12. All right. And 12 is the number of months in a year. Okay, fine. Those are number facts. If I change this to 10, I get 10 as the average thickness of the Arctic ice sheet in feet. But you get the idea. So what I want to quickly do is to very quickly build an app for you. We're going to build it and we're going to run it two ways. It's going to be the exact same app both ways. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can work with this using both an XML HTTP request, all right, and how you can do it using fetch, all right? It's not a grand thing or a glorious thing or anything like that, all right? And I was going to go and type it in from scratch, but is this it? No, I've got the whole thing done already for you. All right, let's see. I'm going to just figure out where I put it. I know I've got it on, got a flash drive here that I put it on, so I'll just grab it from there. And there it is. Okay. All right. So if I bring this up, I'm going to bring this thing up that says Ajax. I'm going to bring it up in code. Okay. Now, there's an index 1 and an index 2. They're exactly the same except for two things. Let me show you quickly. All right. The first one is this one in here. When you are referring to something, in fact, they may be identical. All right. Let me show you what it looks like. There's no true CSS file in here. Everything that's done in here is done using Bootstrap. You saw how I put a 10 in there before, and when I did, it came back, or 12. That's how many months are in a year. Well, notice if I put in 1, I get that. 12, all right, it's giving me something else, and that's okay. 123, okay. So it's giving me number facts, okay. And it only goes up to a certain point. So if I come in here and put in 6, the number of sides on a cube, 66, the number of hot dogs eaten by somebody, 666, the number of the devil. And here, it'll just keep saying it's either boring or uninteresting or whatever. That's not the key thing. The key takeaway on here is the fact that what this is doing, all right, is I'm using this to go out to here. And I'm requesting information from a site that is out on the internet. All right. So what I'm going to show you in here is how we can do that and how we can do it both using an XML HTTP request and how we can do it using fetch. All right. Now, these are just meta tags here, and this is bringing in Bootstrap. I'm only bringing in Bootstrap CSS file. I don't need any JavaScript because I don't use any Bootstrap JavaScript in here. This says when this starts, when the program starts, where you're going to display the fact about a number, hide it because we haven't asked for a number yet. This is the title. And then we get a bunch of Bootstrap in here. BG dark, so the background is going to be almost a black. Everything in Bootstrap, again, is typically done within a container. So you can see that's there. Then what do we have? Well, we're working with a row. All right. What's in that row? Well, we're only telling it to take up half the screen. Col MD6. But we want it centered on the screen. So that's the MX auto. Then we're creating what's called a card, which is basically just like a rectangle. The background will be blue. The text in it will be white. We'll have a little bit of top margin and a little bit of padding. All right. Inside of there, we'll have an H1 tag that says number facts and a paragraph that says enter a number and get a random fact. Nothing surprising there. All right. Then what I'm monkeying with here, this is where you enter a number. And that's all that that is designed to do, is to let you enter a number. All right. Then this is where your number fact is going to show. That's the whole thing. All right. And I just wanted to explain all of it to you just so you saw it. All right. Now let's go in and look. Let's look in here. Let's look at the JavaScript. The first one is an XHR, and you'll notice 23 lines of code. So I'd like to go over each one of these with you and then look at the one for the fetch and go over all of that with you as well. All right. So again, we could have come in here and created an alias where we let the $ equal the document query selector. There's not much of it, so I just did it like this. All right. So this is, as it says, the fact. This is the text that goes along with that fact. All right. This is the number that we're going to input. Now, with all that, there's not a whole heck of a lot new in there. We're just basically setting up some variables based on the value that are in some text boxes. All right. This is a little bit new on line 5. What do I mean? Well, we're adding an event listener. What that says is every time we type something into that box, like I put in 12, but I put in a 1, then a 2, then a 3, etc. Every time we do that, call this routine. That's right here. That's the whole routine. All right. So it's calling get fact Ajax. So the idea behind this is this was to show you what this looks like when you use one of these XML HTTP requests. So this is the whole routine. What this is saying right here is grab the number that the user put in. All right. If the number that if there was a number in there, do this. If there wasn't any number in there, there's nothing to do. All right. So if there is something in there, so if we put in a number, make a new XML HTTP request. We're going to call that request XHR. It's just a common name. This is a GET request. We're not changing any information. We're just going out and accessing information. So we're telling it to open up our XHR request, use a GET, go out to this website, which was the numbers AWD1000 website, and add to that whatever number we put in. So if we put in a 12, it should go out to http://numbersapi.com/12. Then it's saying, okay, load the results in. If it worked, take that area that's supposed to hold the answer that in our HTML we set to display none, but now display it. And take the text that you're giving me from that website and display that text inside of there. All right. So it's an open and it's a send. You already saw that. You saw that earlier. All right. When we went through what was in the textbook. And in here in the onload, we're checking the status. And we're not allowing it to go on and do the rest unless the status came back as a 200. So that's the first one. All right, let's look at the other one. Again, this is virtually the same, if not the same. But what's different in here is this. So this XHR was 23 lines long. You might have found that fairly easy to understand. It might have been very hard to understand. We look at the other one, the fetch, the first lines that are in here, these are exactly the same as what we saw earlier. They're exactly the same. This one, this line before, this said get XHR request. Now it's, or get fact XHR, I guess. Now it's get fact fetch. So what's the difference? There's the code right there. And we're telling the system, again, as long as the user put in a number, go out to that website just like before, but now we're doing it as a fetch. All right. If this worked, then take the response, and that's going to be the text that you're going to show. If that worked, then show the div that you're going to put it in. All right. And then put it in there. And if along the way there was any kind of error associated with this, just show the error on screen. That's literally what there is to this. All right. So little faster than I thought it would be, but it is 9 o'clock. So let's take till 9:15 and let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to go over chapter 19 in the book. All right, so I can close all this stuff. And again, when we come back then, it'll be chapter 19, which is on Node.js. All right, see you in 15 minutes. And I'll be right back. Um, 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 um. All right, it's 9:15, so I'm going to continue on. And now we're just going to go through the last chapter in the book, which is chapter 19, how to work with Node.js. In one sentence, Node.js allows you to write JavaScript on the server side. Everything we've been doing with JavaScript this semester has been on the client side. All right. And Node allows you to work with JavaScript on the server side. Now, there's a lot of advantages to being able to use the same language for both client-side development and server-side development. One is, if you're the person who's going to be doing the work on both ends, it's only one language that you have to learn. All right. And, all you're basically doing is improving your JavaScript skills in that way. Now, you'll notice in here, they talk about when to use Node and how to install Node. That's in the intro. Then how to use the Node command. Most of this is whatever. And how to work with Node modules. And finally, how to use the NPM, which is referred to as the Node Package Manager, to install modules. So this is a short chapter. I don't think it'll take very long. The first thing to show you, all right, and again, I probably already have shown you this, but I'm going to show it again anyway. I just typed in Control Panel, and now I'm clicking on, these are all the programs that I've got installed on my machine. All right, and if I go down to the ends, there is Node.js. All right, it says it's 84 meg in size, which means it really isn't that big. And mine was last installed on July 1st of this year. So I'm just going to uninstall it. I'm going to right mouse click on it and choose uninstall. Are you sure you want to uninstall? Yes. And it'll take anywhere from 30 seconds or so, and it'll be uninstalled. And you'll notice then that it won't be shown over here anymore. All right. And it's gone. All right. So to install it, simply I go out to nodejs.org. All right. This is it. Not a very pretty site. And that's all of it. And you'll notice in here that there's two versions. There's one that says LTS and one that says current. For 99% of users, you'll use the LTS. LTS stands for long-term support. And that means that everything that's in there has been tested and should work. The current has some new features that could potentially lock up. It's still in the development phase. All right. So I'm going to go and click on the one that says 20.9.0 LTS. And it's going and it's basically saving an executable on my system. And it should give me a message in just a couple seconds that it's all been saved. So if I go over here into my downloads, there it is. All right, so what do I do on here? Pretty simple. I double click it. I may get a message back where it beeps at me a little. Some of you may, and it says you need admin permission, just say okay. So it's just a matter of clicking next a few times. Next, accept, and next. Yeah, that's fine, and next. We want everything, so next. All right, I don't even click that, and next, and install. Again, now it's asking me for permission. I'll click yes. And it's been successfully installed. All right, and as you can see, it took even less time to install it than it did to uninstall it. So I don't need this executable anymore, so I'm going to delete that. All right. And, it's like, again, big deal. Well, now I am able to do a lot of things on the server side that I couldn't do previously. All right. I do want to mention in here that when you look in here, probably the most important part of the stuff that's in here are these API docs, because it shows you all of the different things that you can do in here with Node. You might say, well, that's not that many. But notice if I click, for example, file system, those are all the file system things that I can do. All right, so there are literally hundreds of things that you can do in here. All right, so with that said, let's just jump back into the book then. So an intro, how to use it, how to work with modules, how to use NPM, okay? So you can read that, but again, Node allows you to run JavaScript on the server side. That's the key thing. When to use it? All right, and I'll give you a few things. It says it provides a way to interactively test JavaScript expressions and statements. We'll look at that. It's a waste of your time, but that's okay. Second, if you want to use JavaScript to write applications that run outside of a web browser, you can do it for that. Third, if you want to use JavaScript to write server-side scripts, there's a lot of built-in stuff in Node. The install I just showed you, there was nothing more to it than that. They may show you it in a little different way than I just showed you. I don't know. But I went out to nodejs.org and just clicked the install and I chose the LTS. All right. So they go through the steps in here. Like I said, I don't think you missed anything. So, all right. So how to use this? Well, when you use Node, you can use Node to do what's called REPL right here. Read, eval, print, loop. Okay. Now, is this a big thing? Yes and no. If you remember that if we go and we bring up Visual Studio Code and we want to run a program, we can only run it from an HTML file. You can't run a program from a CSS file. You can't run a program from a JavaScript file, but you can do certain things with REPL. All right. You can put in some expressions, etc., and they're going to show you some of this in here. All right. So how do you do that? Well, you may or may not be aware of this because I've never really shown it to you before. But if we come in here, let's just go into the one that we had up here before with Ajax. All right, we had this thing open. All right, and it was open right here. So it's the same one that we just looked at with the fetch rather in the XHR. All right, but I'm going to show you something that I haven't shown you before, and that is how to basically take my screen and split it into two. And on the top half, I'm going to have my program, and on the bottom half, all right, right down here, the way that my screen is set up at least, I'm going to have Git and GitHub available to me. And I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go down to Terminal. And it splits my screen in two. And now on this bottom part of the screen that's in here, this bottom part, basically that's the equivalent of me going back, right mouse clicking like I'd been showing you and basically coming in here and choosing that we wanted her to open up GitHub, Git, I should say. But if I come in here now and I type in Node, now I'm in what's called REPL. Okay. Does this matter? Well, as an example, I could write this: let age equal 21. All right. And it says age is undefined. Don't worry about that. So if I come in here and I type in age, notice it says 21. Everything that you type in here right now returns something. So when I typed in let age equal 21, there was nothing to return. So it typed in the word undefined. But when I typed in age, that was the equivalent of me asking, what does the variable age hold? All right. And you saw that since I set it to 21. So when you use REPL like this, you can actually write small programs, etc., in here, test out different things. I will tell you that the amount of time that I've used this REPL tool and all the times I've ever taught Node and the like, not much longer than what I've just shown you. All right. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that you don't use it. All right. There's just usually better ways of doing it. but that's what they talk about in here. Okay, and they give you some examples of things that you can key in. So Node provides a REPL. It interactively evaluates JavaScript code. I think that's enough to say about it. All right, where we start to come into things here where you've got some power, so to speak, is when you run scripts. All right, so it says figure 19.3 shows you how you can use Node to run a script. What's a script? A script is some pre-written code that's designed to do something. All right. It says the first one shows a script that has been saved in a file named index.js. When you run these scripts, you're running JavaScript scripts. So they should always end with a .js extension. All right. So in this example that they have in here, notice this file contains JavaScript that calculates a future value. You're like, well, we already did all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but we don't even care right now in this example about a user interface. If we just wanted to know if our logic worked, all right, we could do that. So if you look at what's in here, everything that's in here, everything that you see right here, we've done all this. The only one we haven't spent much time on has been console.log. All right. But what you can do is you can come in here and run this script. There'll be no interface. All right. There'll be no user interface, but it'll say if you took $10,000 and you saved it for 10 years at a 7.7% interest rate, it's going to figure out your future value for you at the end of those 10 years. And that's it. All right. So it's going to look like this. And it's going to tell you that over 10 years, basically, what you have in here will have doubled. All right. And that's literally, like I said, that's literally all there is to it. Now, I could run that for you, but you've already seen what the results are going to be right here. All right. When we've used console, all right, and which hasn't been all that much, but if I come back into here, and I'm going to jump back into here, and I'm going to run my program again, the same, we'll run the fetch one that we had before. All right. So if I come through here and I run this, you see it. But if I right mouse click in here and choose inspect and go over to console, right now it's not showing me anything, but I can put in console.log statements right here. I could literally grab all of that code that you just saw in the book for the future value and do it right here. All right. I mean, I can do simple stuff like, all right, but I can also write console.logs that will, create variables, do arithmetic calculations with those variables, do if statements or loops with those variables, etc. if I want to do that. And again, what I'm getting to in here, and the reason that you are being shown this, is that 2 or 3 of you who are in this current class next semester will be taking AWD1111, Database Driven Web Development 1, and you're going to do a lot of work. The whole class basically is you doing something in Node. All right, so like I said, at least you've seen it. All right. Now, sometimes in order for you to do something with a script, you need to pass information into it. And you can do that as well. So what they're doing in here is they're allowing you to run the script, because in the previous script, it always has $10,000, 7.7% interest, 10 years. But you don't always want to do that. You might want to run it with a bunch of different values. So this is the way that you can do that. So when you run the script, node, future value, You put in a number that represents your initial investment. You put in another number that represents the amount of interest per year. And then you put in another number that does the years. So when it comes back, I could run it again and now put in node space future underscore value, $25,000, let's say 5% interest, and I wanted to do it for 20 years. All right. And that's the idea behind that. All right. Says to make it possible for developers to share server-side scripts, Node.js includes what's called a module system. Now, in many ways, this book kind of ties everything together. And what I mean is, in one of the lectures that we went through last week, I think it was chapter 17, but I don't remember. All right. We talked in there about modules. And I mentioned with modules, you do two things. You do importing and you do exporting. All right. Those are basically the two things that you do with modules. All right. Now, what does that have to do with anything? All right. Well, at the top of page 665 here, they show you two of the built-in modules available for Node. The first one is FS, which stands for file system. Why would you want to use that? If you wanted to use Node to be able to manipulate stuff that people had put into files, you could use that. All right. Then there's HTTP. What you will end up doing in the AWD 1111 class is you will be using your machine as both a client and a server. You'll use your machine to do both. And to use your machine as a server, you'll use some of these HTTP functions. All right. Now, there's hundreds of other ones other than just FS and HTTP. When you want to take those built-in modules and bring them into your program, all right, you typically use require statements. And that's what they're showing right here. So when we look right here, this is an example. And it's actually a really good example. Still have the use strict at the top. Then const fs, which stands for file system, equals require fs. That's its name. That's the name of the file system. Then once you've done that, you're able to go in and say fs dot, and any method related to the file system module is now at your disposal. All right. So again, you use a special function named require to import. All right. And if you remember, we talked about imports and exports last week. We'll look at exports, I believe, a little later in here. So they give an example of using the file system mode. All right. It's not, is this that important? No. But it's the idea that there's not really all that much you can't do with this. All right. Now, a couple terms in here, and we did go over these in the last chapter, but they weren't explained to you. All right. And it says Node.js is designed for asynchronous programming. As a result, it's ideal for server-side tasks that need to be done in an asynchronous manner. What does that even mean? All right. If something is done asynchronously, what happens is you've got two choices. All right. And that is, it's like, let's say that I ask for a database. And if you don't know what a database is, okay, let's just say I ask for a file from out on the internet. All right. I've asked for this file. And it turns out that this file is in a directory, which is in a directory, which is in a directory, which is in a directory. So it's really, really layers deep. And it's gigabytes in size. So in other words, if I ask for the file, boom, it's not going to load it like that. It'll take a little bit of time. All right. If something is asynchronous, what that means is I am able to go on and do other things while it's waiting. I'm not going to have my machine lock up waiting for it to happen. On the other hand, if it's done synchronously, I do have to wait. All right. I've read all sorts of different things. Some people say that synchronous is more similar to human conversation, where, at least the way it's supposed to work, I talk, you listen. I get done talking, then you talk, and I listen. All right. That's the way that it's supposed to work, at least. I'm not saying it always does. Okay. All right. Says how to use the built-in file system module. Well, notice what comes back into here then. These promises. We looked at this a little bit in the last chapter. The dot then and the dot catch. All right. That's why I'm saying what I think will happen next spring in the AWD1111 class is that the first thing that's gone over in there is a review of more advanced JavaScript terminology and some examples of things like the use of promises before you go on and do other things. All right. Well, that's all fine. There's hundreds of modules, but they don't do everything in the world. So you can build your own modules as well. All right. So here, notice what they're doing. At the top, and you can see it in the mustard color, they're exporting this entire routine that's called calculate future value. They're exporting it, and then on the other end, somebody else will be able to import it. All right. That's the whole idea. Now, most of the stuff that you do in the AWD 1111 class, most of the stuff that's in there, you will be exporting stuff that already exists. In other words, not a lot of stuff that you create, but you will create your own stuff as well. So as it says here on the bottom of the page, to export an object or function, you add it to the exports property, and there's different ways you can do this. All right, to import it, you can use the require. All right, however, it says when you create your own modules, the require typically needs to include a path to the module, so it needs to know where that lives. All right, the last thing that's really discussed in this chapter is the NPM. NPM is Node Package Manager. You can kind of look at it this way, that the Node Package Manager is kind of like a grocery store. Even more than that, it's kind of like a Walmart, in that it has virtually anything that you might want in it. So if I go out, I think it's npmjs.org, but I might be wrong. There it is. All right. Again, not a heck of a lot to it. But let's say that I wanted something where I wanted to create my own program. And in my own program, I wanted to do something where if the user, this is kind of a silly idea, but if the user clicked the button, it would show them one of the Marvel superheroes, and it would show them a random one. Okay, so I'm going to come into NPM here, and I'm going to type in Marvel superheroes. And, well, what does it have? Marvel characters, superheroes, etc. So let's say I grab the Marvel characters. All right. The first thing it tells me is how to use that. So I've got to install it. So I come in here and I say npm, which means Node Package Manager, I for install, then the name of the package. Now I'm able to use what's in there. They even give me an example right here of how I can use it. All right. And most of these even have their own GitHub page. All right. Now, you probably wouldn't want to download that, but there's an explanation afterwards that's a much more extensive explanation in how to use this. Now, it's been a while since I've done this, but we'll see if it works or not. So let me go back to here. And I'm going to go to right here, this NPM. I'm going to grab that and click here and just copy it. All right. And I'm going to go back to where we just were, which was right there. And now I'm going to go back into here. All right. And now I'm going to grab that line, NPM I Marvel characters. Now it's loading that and it's telling me that it's got it. All right. Okay. I'm going to grab all of the code that they show in here. All right. Not sure if this will work or not, but I'm going to try it anyway. Okay. And then I'm going to come in and put it in right where I've been working. Let me clear this again. And then let me paste it in. All right. Doesn't like something that's in here. Syntax error. Could be an error. It could be my error. All right. It could be an error in the actual program itself. Now, that probably didn't show you very much. You're like, wow, that's nothing. But all I want to tell you is that much of the work that you will do in this class, you will go out to the Node Package Manager, and you will see in the Node Package Manager if something you're interested in exists by searching for it in here. All right. So what you have in here, and I don't know what the number is. The last time I taught this, I think there were 850,000 different packages in here. All right. They're all free to use. There's no charge for any of this. All right. And what I showed you, it's a little bit more complicated than that because there's some startup and some setup you have to do. But that said, it's not that it's really that difficult to use once you've done it a time or two. All right. So they talk about the NPM registry. It's what I just showed you. All right. npmjs.com or .org, they'll both get you there. And they give you an example. So here they're installing a different thing. I installed that Marvel characters. You can install virtually anything that's in that registry. All right, and that's what they're mentioning in here. They use the HTTP server module, and what they do in here is they create their own server. So you might say, fine, why don't you do that? We could do that. All right. And then you run it on a certain port number. So what have they got here? Well, this is really, when you look at this, okay, localhost 8080, we are running this particular thing not from inside of Visual Studio Code. We're running it right from inside of a web browser itself. And we even told it what port to use to run that on. All right. They do mention that it's possible that your firewall, if you've got one set up on your system, it may not let you do that. You might have to click a couple buttons first. This is the other part, and I didn't really want to get into this too much, but in order to be able to use this stuff and make it do what you want it to do, you typically have to come in and you have to set up what's called a package.json file. All right. And you look at this, you're like, I don't understand what any of that means. Guess what? You don't have to. Because when you set up your programs, the file will basically be set up for you. All right. They mention in here that NPM packages use semantic versioning. All right. And that means there's three numbers: a version, a release, and then like an update. All right. So this is version 0, release 12, update 3. All right. And there's all sorts of other stuff in here. Some of these start with a caret. Some of these don't. Some of them start with a tilde. You'll learn all that stuff in the class. And even with that, is that hard? The answer is actually no. This isn't a hard package to use. It's a little bit, when you first do it, it might even seem a little bit overwhelming. Once you've worked with it a little bit, it really and truly isn't bad. All right. Okay. So we've now hit everything in the book. And according to what we had today, all right. So we've now finished this. So next, can't physically hand it out, but let's go over the JavaScript final programming assignment. I sent it out to all of you this morning in the email. It's right here. I'm just going to open up this one. In fact, I've also got it here as a Word document, which I can make it a little bit bigger. So let me open it up as a Word doc. There it is. Okay. So you are to create a fully responsive website. You can use media queries by themselves. You can use Bootstrap. All right. But this website that you create should have 4 pages on it. All right. Page 1, as it says, should have a JavaScript carousel on it. If you don't know what a JavaScript carousel is, I mean, for any of this, as you'd probably guess, all right, a great place, I've been pushing it at you all semester long, has been W3 Schools. So I'm going to type in W3 Schools, JavaScript carousel. How to create a slideshow, W3 Schools. Bootstrap carousel, that's what I'd use. So you go out there, and here's an example of a carousel. All right. They show you exactly how to set it up. It should also, since it's Bootstrap, it should also be responsive. And you can see that indeed it is. All right. So you're making this 4-page website. The first page is to be a JavaScript carousel. You're not to use jQuery, just vanilla or plain JavaScript. You should have a minimum of 3 pictures. And part of what you're being graded on in here is I don't want pictures of your family's vacation or whatever. This is a site on rock, paper, scissors. So you should go out and pick out 3 pictures for rock, paper, scissors. You can go out to Google Images. You could try pexels.com, unsplash.com, etc. All right. That's 25 points. And I just showed you how to get to 25 points. All right. Page 2 should be a frequently asked question page. We looked at one of those last week. I showed you an assignment that we did, that gym thing, where we had on there an FAQ page. That FAQ page was done using jQuery, and it was all about the use of BMI, or what BMI is about. So you can write that either in regular vanilla JavaScript or jQuery. Allow, put 4 or 5 different things in there and allow any of them to be open at one time, all of them to be open at one time, or none of them to be open at a time. And if you're like, well, geez, what would I put in there? Well, you should know this already, that if 2 people play rock, paper, scissors, there's really 6 possible combinations. Rock, rock, paper, 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 scissors. Actually, I have 9, I guess. Or paper, rock, rock, paper, paper, scissors, scissors, paper, etc. So you could explain the winning combinations and have each one of those be in an FAQ page, something like that. That's 25 points. Page 3, you're to program the actual game using vanilla JavaScript. All right, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You're playing against the computer. I'll tell you quickly how I did it. I had the computer generate a random number between 1 and 3. If the user If the computer generated a 1, then the computer had rock. If the computer generated a 2, then the computer had paper, and a 3, it had scissors. Once the computer had a choice, I picked. And then I let the system tell me who won. All right. So you should let the user know who won. Then at the end of each game, wait 5 seconds and then clear the text box for the computer choice and the user choice. All right. Also, you should have some kind of an image on the bottom of the screen. So if rock wins, you could have a picture of a rock, or you could have a fist and make it look like that. Paper, scissors. All right. I know that there is a Spock paper, scissors, also one that was done for Star Trek. People ask me, could I do a Spock one? I don't really care. If you really want to do that, you can. That's 50 points. Finally, page 4, as it says in here, is a contact page. All right. Assume that all fields in there are required. Validate each field. One or more vanilla text fields. What does that mean? First name, last name, etc. One or more email text fields. One or more tell text fields, where you put down a telephone number. A drop-down list of states. I gave you that last week with that gym site. All right. A radio button group of mutually exclusive choices. All right. You could ask the user, for example, how do you want to receive information from us? Do you want it to be email? Do you want it to be text? Do you want it to be USPS mail? That would be 3 things you could put in there for a radio button. 3 different radio buttons. A checkbox. All right. Could ask a person their gender. I don't know why you do that, but if you wanted to, all sorts of different things, AM, PM, etc. All right. It says put all of it into a format similar to what's shown on page 211 in your text. All right. And I probably, we did close it. So in here, I want it to look like this. In other words, this is sometimes called a validation summary up here, where you let the user know every problem that they have. All right. They even show you how to set that up in here. If you go through these pages, there's the JavaScript for it. So this is not meant to be something that's not new. Or I should say it's, it isn't new. How's that? But I will tell you, I am going to make sure that every single requirement that's in here is done. So let's say you don't add a clear button. Oh, I forgot to do that. Then you lose 10 points. Back from the olden days of the beginning of this class, if you forget to validate your 4 HTML pages, 12 points. If you don't validate your CSS page, 3 points. And as it says, the final 25 points, I'm not showing you what mine looks like. I want to get a dozen of these and I want them all to look different. They should all pretty much function in the same way, but they should all look different. The main page should look different. What's in the carousel should look different, etc. All right. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of this. Now, that's a lot to give you, a lot for you to swallow. And again, what I would do, tomorrow's a lab day. If nothing else, lay out what you think you're going to put in there. All right, go out to Unsplash or Pexels or Google Images. See if there's pictures you can use for your carousel or whatever else you want to put in there. All right. All right. So that was going by our list, whoops, let me close that. So going by our list of stuff today, all right, we have now finished the Muroc text. I went over the test, the final. So let's take a look at the last thing that's in here, the JS Hot number 2 test. And again, if you have not turned it in, right now it's in the book as a 0. All right, so I'm going to show you what I did on my copy of it. All right, so let me start by coming in here. And this was the test. There are some things on the test we have not worked on yet. Example, checkboxes. All right. So as it says, I added a bonus question. You could only get 100 points. But if you lost, let's say 15 points where you'd have gotten an 85, but you did that last thing correctly, you still got 100 points. Yeah, it says you could actually get 125, but the most I gave was 100. All right. I provided some hyperlinks. So this was it. Now, again, I'll show you mine. Let me bring it up. And do I have it here? I know I have it in here someplace. All right, so here is mine. Just called it 34 because it was chapters 3 and 4. All right. So first of all, you were given the HTML. All right. And you were given the CSS. So you were given all that. Now, if you wanted to, you could have made changes to anything that was in here. And what do I mean? Well, for instance, where was it? Here. I believe that this stuff was actually shown in your book as right here, 1999 without the decimal place. So I put in the decimal place. All right. I mean, again, if you say, well, geez, you didn't tell us we could do that, you didn't ask. And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I'm just saying, I probably don't think of everything when I go over this, but I changed all those. So instead of 1,999, it's $19.99. Same here, same here, same here, and same here. All right. If you didn't like the names of the buttons, you could have changed those. Would have been fine. Any variable that you didn't like, you could have changed those as well. All right. Now, I'm not going to go over the CSS because I don't really think I changed anything. But let's run this, and then we'll go and look at the associated JavaScript code. All right. So one thing you were asked to do is down at the bottom here, put in the current date in that kind of a format. I'll show you that in a minute. All right. But the other thing is, let's say that we did this. Okay, so we highlighted all of those right there, and we calculate. So that should be what? 20, 50, 63, 68, 77. It's like 77 or $78 and some cents. So, okay, maybe I'm wrong. 74.45. And then we were supposed to do taxes on that. I don't remember what the rate was. We can go back and look at it. And these two together should have come in here. Finally, if you click clear, it should clear everything out. All right. That was the majority of what you were supposed to do. All right. So do I have the test up? Yes, I do. All right. It says there were 6 problems with this. Submit button didn't work. The price was not being calculated. The tax was not being calculated. There were no constants or variables being used. All right. The total with tax was not being calculated, and the checkboxes did not add their prices correctly. All right. And then again, you were supposed to put that date in there at the bottom. That's when we took the test. So what? Today's the 13th. That was 19 days ago. So that was almost 3 weeks ago. All right. Clearing all the radio buttons. All right. And then finally clearing out the text boxes. And that's what I gave you the extra credit, so to speak, for. All right. And I gave you that tutorial for working on checkboxes. All right. So we take a look at this. Let's just bring that up in here. And I will bring up close that, bring up the JavaScript file. There it is. Okay. So taking it from the top. All right. I used the get elements by tag name and started by making an alias for that. Okay. Calculating the total. What is that? That's going to be all this stuff. And then we have to cycle our way through here. This is clearing everything out. And then we're going to cycle through it again and see what checkbox has been checked. There could be nothing checked. All right, 1, 2, 3. I think there were 5 of them. So any combination thereof. And every time we checked one, we grabbed their item total and added it, or their value and added it to the item total. All right, plus we added one to our checked items. If there was nothing checked, as it says in here, we should have said, please select at least one item. All right. Then we've got a taxable total in here. So it's our price times 5%. Then our total with tax is the item total plus the item total times 5%. All right. Then in these cells right here, item total, tax, and the total with tax. Clearing the form, this was that 25 points right here. All right, this cleared out all the check boxes. In fact, I think that was worth 10 itself. And then this did the rest of it. So again, and here was the date. And I even told you about this. And I even showed you in one of the earlier lectures how you could go on to W3 schools. And basically that's where I took that from. All right, I added bold and center. I did add that into my CSS so that the date would have been centered on the screen and it would have been bolded. Then in here, we added 2 event listeners, one for our submit button and one for our clear button. So again, one more time, taking from the top, you'll notice less than 70 lines. And I'll bet you if you counted the number of comments and the number of blank lines, it'd be around 50 lines at the most. So we didn't get elements by tag name. All right. Came in here, this starting right here and going down to right here, that was calculating the total. Item total is each one of those things. So each time you check a checkbox or click a checkbox, it's going to add that. Tax is going to be, 5% times this, and total with tax is going to be this plus this. So again, it started by always clearing out anything that was in there. All right. And then going through and figuring out what they've chosen. As it says, if the checked items equal 0, give them an alert that says you must enter or select at least one item. Then starting in line 30, that's where we're doing the final calculations. Tax is that item total. All right. And that item total again is the addition of each one of the check boxes that were checked. Multiply that by 5%. Add the tax plus the item total and you get your total with tax. And this just put it in the right places on screen. Clearing the form again was just that. Adding the date again was just that. And I didn't really care if yours was bolded and centered or not. Some people did things like that and some did not. And then adding our 2 event listeners at the bottom. That was the whole thing. Again, 1 for the calculate button, submit button, whatever it's called, and 1 for the clear button. So again, you've already seen it, but if I come back to here and I choose nothing, try that again. All right, I choose nothing and I click calculate. There's my please select at least 1 item. All right, so what? This is 20, 50, 63.50, 68.50, and 9. I don't know what, maybe I didn't add one of them. Let's see. So let's see, 19. That's correct. All right. 29, that's correct. 1349, that's correct. 499, that's correct. And the good robot, somehow I've got a 5 in there instead of an 8. So that's on me. All right, so I guess I don't get a perfect test. But to go back in there and see that, then I'd have to go back into here. And let's see. Well, look, 599, 899. So that should have been an 8. Let's save it all and run it again. Now this should work for 8. And it does. And if everything is highlighted, now 77.45. All right. Now, again, that would have been an error. Would I have seen that? I don't know. Would I have taken off for that? I don't know. All right. Okay, that's what I have. So again, tomorrow, as you've already heard, all right, tomorrow is going to be a lab day. All right. Do you need a lab day? It depends on who you are. Some people are virtually all caught up with everything. Some are not. Remember that what is due this Sunday, again, are the written tests for chapters 12 through 19 and finishing up from the free code camp, finishing up that ES6 module that had 29 lessons. All right, so 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That's 80 points right there. And doing the free code camp, finishing that up, that's 75 more points. So that's 155 points. All right. So if you are behind, that's a good chance for you to catch up. The final, again, as you already saw, is worth 200 points. All right. So tomorrow will be a lab. When you come in on Wednesday, we're going to write an application together as a class. Probably one on Wednesday, probably one on Thursday. All right. I'm in the middle of doing one of those right now. Friday will again be a lab. And again, next week, technically, I'm off, which just means I'm going to be working from the house. All right. If you do have questions, you'd be able to get a hold of me and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. That really is all I had for today. Have a good rest of the day. And I will talk to you next on Wednesday, because again, tomorrow, no taping done. See you Wednesday.